morning. Thanks for joining us here on KXAN Live. I'm your anchor, Esmeralda Zamora, and this morning we're learning a little bit of science with our KXAN meteorologist, Kristen Currie. Kristen, thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
Of course, pretty good. It's a Wednesday. We're halfway through the week.
Yes, and it's not as chilly as it normally is, right?
Right, yeah, this morning, coming off of the 20s and 30s we've had the last couple of mornings, this morning really wasn't too bad, but we know that's going to change. There is a big cold front coming in this weekend that's going to crater our temperatures, so definitely enjoy that milder weather while it's here.
Yeah, and that's exactly related to our topic today, which is about winter weather and how difficult it is to forecast that in Texas, right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't consider Texas a big storm or a big state for winter storms, but we do get winter storms in here, and they can get real messy. It's not a cut and dry kind of forecast that you might see in other places. So I figured we'll kind of dive into, what makes our storms so unique here in Central Texas. And why they're so difficult to forecast.
Yeah, and one of those reasons is because we're so far south, right?
Yes. So let's dive into it, because when it comes to the precipitation types, this is what I mean by difficult to forecast, because we usually wait until, 24 hours out, maybe even sometimes 12 hours out to tell you whether it's going to be rain, freezing rain, sleet, or snow. And that's kind of unique to areas in the south, is we do see that icy mix sometimes, and not just the rain converting to snow. So let's talk about some of those reasons why. Oh, I forgot to change the banner, but I will tell you this, that cold air, it gets tough to reach all the way down to the southern states here, because if you think about, especially considering this Arctic air mass that we have coming in this weekend, this is going to be coming from the Arctic, right? It's its namesake. So as that cold air comes down to the south, it is moderating some, but that's a good 2,000 to 4,000 miles. It comes from the Arctic down to Texas, and that's tough to do. So it's tough to get that cold air all the way down to Texas. When it does, sometimes it's either A, not as cold, or B, there's not as much. Also, our proximity to the Gulf of Mexico makes things pretty tough, because it's not just, a cold air column from the ground to the clouds. In fact, we use weather balloons to kind of help tell us if we have some warmer air up in the higher levels of the atmosphere. And I'm going to get real nerdy on you, Esme. You ready? These skew-T soundings, and I know this is looking like, what? These skew-T soundings, I should say, help us identify where those warm layers are. So if we've got, let's say, a storm system that's digging far enough south to where it's going to cross over Texas, sometimes it can pull up some of that warm Gulf moisture, but we're not necessarily seeing it down here at the ground. We're so really cold with that Arctic air, but some of that warm Gulf moisture can be up top here, and we look to see how deep that warm layer is. Is it super deep to where we could see any snowflakes up top melt and then refreeze down at the bottom to where we would see freezing rain? Is that warm layer kind of shallow to the point where, some of those snowflakes will partially melt, but not completely, and we get sleet? I look at some of these skew-T soundings to figure out that red line would be temperature, and then the green line would be dew point. If they're close together, we've got a lot of moisture, we've got a saturated atmosphere. If the temperatures are on the warmer side, maybe let's say in a certain layer of the atmosphere, then that would tell me, we could see some icing mix. Those are the different things we can forecast when it comes to Texas weather. And we use our weather balloons to help us identify where those warm layers are. Now, something to also consider, though, is our weather balloons here in Central Texas, they get launched from Del Rio, right? Which is a couple hundred miles away. Yeah. It's not very close. In special scenarios in the springtime, we can see weather balloons go up from St. Edward's University, which is obviously right in the heart of Austin. But they do that for springtime severe weather. When it comes to winter storms, we're relying on the Del Rio weather balloon, or there's some other weather balloon sites in Texas that can help us identify, just how cold that area is above us. But in general, we are looking at these skew-Ts to help us identify just how deep that warm air is. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. How is forecasting this type of temperatures and this type of weather how are we different from other parts of the country? Places that are more inland, places that are outer, kind of like we are.
Yeah, let me change this real quick. Give me 2 seconds to just change this so it'll make it easier for everybody to understand what I'm talking about, when we're talking about a place like Central Texas, what's difficult for us is the fact that we are interior, right? We're not right on the coast, but the proximity is pretty close to the Gulf. We're going to get some of that air. Whereas you talk about things like the northern plains, the central plains, where they're a little bit farther away from that warm Gulf waters, they can see just flat rain turn to snow, right? As soon as that cold air gets in from the north, they're going to see some of those milder temperatures ahead of that front quickly pivot below freezing, and you're talking flat snow, right? Sometimes, occasionally, we can get some ice storms up there in Kansas and Nebraska. But oftentimes, we're just kind of flirting with that with most of our winter storms. You think back to 2021, the 6 to 9 day winter storm event we had here in Texas, that actually started with some ice. And that gave us, a bigger issue before the 6 inches of snow sat on top of it, because underneath all that snow was a layer of ice. 2023 was another prime example. Not a lick of snow. We had 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch of ice. So we tend to get more of that messy, icier weather here in Texas because of the proximity to the Gulf of Mexico and more of that warmer, moisture air coming up from the Gulf. Whereas some of these storm systems that have plenty of cold air to work with up in the northern plains and in the Northeast, they have just straight kind of rain and snow. Even elevation. Elevation is a big thing too. We have, 300, 400 above sea level foot elevation here in Austin, go up to about 1,000 feet in the hill country. And that difference, although it doesn't seem like it, that difference can be the dividing line between who sees snow and who sees the winter mix down here in the lower elevations, right? So it's very complicated, because finding exactly where that line of snow versus freezing precipitation, so sleet, and freezing rain can be very difficult here in Texas. Not to discount winter weather elsewhere. You think about the New England area, whereas depending on the strength of the storm, they could see maybe 2 to 3 inches of snow, and a neighborhood 10 miles down the road could see about 10 to 12 inches of snow. Every region has its difficulties, but here in Texas, what makes our winter weather so difficult is oftentimes that cold air comes down from the south, but there's not abundant cold air. There is enough of that Gulf moisture being pulled up to mess with the temperature of the air between my head and the cloud, if you will. And it's also important to note, Esme, and I think sometimes people forget, that as much as we want to forecast the weather overhead your house and overhead your workplace, we just can't do that. We've got 15 counties to take care of at KXAM. So we, in 3 to 4 minutes, try and touch on everything we think is important for those 15 counties to know. But you are going to have those little nuances, right? If some spots in the hill country dip a little bit, you do get some of those colder temperatures, and that sleet does go fully snow. That's something that I 100% believe you it's happening, but I'm not going to be able to find those little nuances of slight elevation changes, or slight valley locations. Those microclimates can get real tough depending on how much of the area you're forecasting for. So those are the top 4 things that, as a forecaster, I'm constantly stressed about, because I'm trying to think, okay, do we have enough cold air come down from the south to make snowflakes or freezing rain? Is there too much warm air coming in from the Gulf to where my snowflakes are going to sometimes melt and become icy mix? What's my hill country going to see versus Austin? And am I taking care of everybody in the KXAM viewing area? So that kind of gives an umbrella of a behind the scenes look, if you will, of the forecasting that we do in the Weather Center during a winter weather event.
Wow. There's a lot to it.
Yeah, because I know the reason I brought this up as a topic is because people were super frustrated last week because we really didn't give specifics until the day before, you know, as to how much we would see if we would just see cold rain versus freezing rain. And there was a lot of scuttlebutt online, people saying there's going to be all this snow in Austin, and you really got to find that trusted source, because at KXAN, we did not put out a single snow map. There was not a single snowfall total map that came from our weather center ahead of the event, because things are so tricky down here in Texas to nail down whether it will be snow, because there is a difference between 1/4 inch of ice and 2 inches of snow. One you can drive on, one you're not doing anything, you know? So those 4 things are what make winter storms in Texas so tricky to forecast. So I hope that sheds light on maybe some viewers are thinking, well, where I'm from, in Montana, they would tell us if it's going to be a big snowstorm the week before. We just can't do that with everything coming into play here.
And like you mentioned, we just wrapped up our little mini freeze that we had at the beginning of the year. What were some of the difficulties in forecasting that specific weather pattern?
I think the biggest thing with last week was we weren't sure if we were going to have those temperatures cold enough at the surface to even deal with freezing rain. Now, as we know, luckily, and what we were forecasting was most of central Texas would stay above 32 at night, and we did. That's why most of us had cold rain, a couple spots of icing in the hill country, but it really wasn't a big winter storm, big winter weather event because our forecast trended towards warmer than freezing temperatures, and that's the difference between a nightmare ice storm and just a cold rain. So that was the biggest thing last week, was just watching that temperature overnight. And once the model started to trend a little bit warmer, then we were confident saying this is mainly going to be a cold rain. Now, we are 5 to 6 days out from our next winter weather event. It's cold front that comes in Saturday, guaranteed. I'll show you the 7 day because there is no question that cold air is coming, right? That we know. So the cold air will be in place starting Sunday, but a disturbance behind it is what brings that wintry mix potential. And we say possible because this could play out like last week where we just have cold rain and a little bit of wintry mix. As of this morning, temperatures were trending colder, which is why I've bumped up the chance for a wintry mix because my confidence is a little higher as to say, hey, this might not just be cold rain. This can very well be some of that wintry mix across more of central Texas. So there are different ways, and every meteorologist, every forecaster is going to look at different things when it comes to a winter weather event. We chat a lot as a weather team as to what messaging we want coming out of the Weather Center. And right now it's the cold is guaranteed. That is a promise. It will get down to the 30s and 40s. But whether or not we are going to see the freezing rain, sleet, or snow versus cold rain is still something we need to work out.
And for everyone going into this cold weather this coming week, do you have any words of encouragement or advice for people to stay focused and prepared for this type of weather?
Yeah, for sure. I would say if you're seeing a map that says 2 to 3 inches of snow in Austin next week, and you're seeing on that social media today, block that person. You do not need that. There is no human, there is no computer, there is no technology that can accurately forecast whether or not we're going to see 2 inches of snow, no snow, freezing rain. There's just too much uncertainty this far out. So I would say be very guarded as to what you're seeing 4 to 5 days out. Now, a day before, 2 days before, we've got a little bit more stock in what we're looking at, better data, especially with, the cold air already coming down the northern plains by the time we hit this weekend. We're going to have a better idea of what those temperatures will look like. So be guarded with what you're looking at on social media. Find a trusted source. Obviously we're going to be a little biased and say that we wish that you would come back to Cakes Again every morning, every night and getting the latest updates from us. If you can't for whatever reason, the Cakes Again weather app has everything we say on TV on the app. So if you're thinking there's no way I'm waking up at 5 a.m. to watch you, girl, the Cakes Again weather app will have the latest weather forecast as a video that you can watch every minute of the day if you wanted to. It constantly updates. But what we're messaging right now with this storm is prepare for the cold. We'll know more about the wintry mix, but you have to prepare for the cold because that unfortunately tends to hurt more people, if not worse. And that's what we saw with the 2021 storm was the cold, and people kind of shelter in when there's ice and snow outside, but they get caught off guard with how quickly temperatures change. And I really don't want that to happen this time. So just make sure that you, your family, your pets, your home, everything is prepared for those hard freezes to come next week.
Yeah, and on our phones, this happened to me yesterday. My little cousin sends me a picture of her phone weather app, and it shows snow on the screen. And she's worried that it's going to be snowing. She can't go to school. And I'm just like, it's not going to snow.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, because the default weather app that a lot of our cell phones have is very very iffy during situations like this, because all that weather app is on your phone, when you're talking just like the general iPhone app, it takes one model data and puts it in there. It's not going through, the 30 to 45 minute analyzing different models to make one good forecast like each meteorologist here at KXAN does every shift, right? I'm looking at multiple models and I'm watching the trends and I'm watching the consistency to say, okay, this one was way off last time, so I'm not going to put a lot of credit into that computer. This computer actually does really well in these kind of scenarios, so I'm really going to watch this one. The iPhone app, the Apple, like all those, they're taking, okay, this model, we'll put it here. And there's no analyzing. There's no human touch to it. So I really would guard you to stay away from those. And if you're traveling, find that local news station that maybe your friend or your family favors, because more often than not in a local TV market, there's actual meteorologists looking at the actual data and doing the science and doing the math for a 7-day that you would see on TV.
Yeah, and just like on our KXAN app, if anyone is interested in looking at the weather, we recommend you download that app onto your phone.
That hourly planner that has the sky icon, the temperature, the wind, I go one by one, hour by hour, and update that in the morning for 48 hours out. So I'm each box for 48 hours. I'm changing and making sure it lines up with my forecast. So that is a human going through each one of those and making sure that it lines up with what I'm thinking the day will be. You're not going to get that in a app that's defaulted on your phone.
Yeah, I agree. So ignore that app.
Yes, throw it out.
Throw it out. So we do have your article. Let me pull it up on my monitor. Here it is. You wrote an article and it's titled Winter Weather Forecasting in Texas. You can find it on our homepage, kxan.com. Talk to me. What are some things that you added into this article that we didn't get to talk about?
It kind of goes into more in detail as to those different factors, areas that are further away from the coast and what they could see. I mentioned here, we are 4,000 or 5,000 miles away from the source of that cold Arctic air. But Fargo, North Dakota, which is obviously way farther north than us, a little bit closer to the source of where this cold air is coming from, their high temperatures next week are not even expected to get up to 0. They're not even expected to get up to 5 below. Fargo, North Dakota on MLK Day has a high of 10 degrees below 0.
And so, that's warm?
Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy to think that it's the same air mass, but that difference between being up in the northern latitudes compared to where we are down here in South Texas or in Central Texas, this far south, that air modifies, and thank goodness it does, because I don't think I can handle 10 below 0. But it's just, our first point there. Because we're so far south, it's hard for that cold air to hold together and make it all the way down, staying as cold as it is. It gets modified as it moves over land, over the northern plains, central plains, and down to the south plains. So it's got more details on that kind of science. I really leaned into kind of pulling back the curtain and saying, hey, here's why this is a mess. Here's why we don't give specifics this far out. And I hope that helps viewers understand our thinking and our messaging when we go up on TV.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kristen.
Of course.
When can our viewers watch you next?
Okay, so coming up next, as far as the forecast update goes, meteorologist Freddie Vela will be in at 11 a.m. on KXAN, and I will be back tomorrow on KXAN News at 4:30 in the morning.
Perfect. Well, thanks for joining us and sharing this insight into how you forecast this type of weather. We're excited to see what you bring for us next week.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see you next Wednesday.
And that's all we have today for our Kristen's Classroom segment. We'll be back later today with some more streams, and we'd love for you all to join us. Thanks so much for watching.